guest co-host, Gary Franchi, sitting with Joyce Riley. We are entering into the third most powerful hour on radio to date. And coming up right now, we have a very special guest. Ladies and gentlemen, I am always so excited when I get a chance to interview people who are making a difference, especially today. Anita Hoge, okay, this is our guest. Buckle up, sit down, strap in, get a piece of paper and pencil, take some notes, because there's going to be some action today in this next hour. Now, she is directly challenging the U.S. educational system. Personally, I was never a fan of school, okay? I was always in the principal's office. I was always challenging authority. I was placed in special classes because I didn't want to do my homework. Why? Because I just wanted to explore the world and I wanted to learn on my own terms. Well, things are changing. Things are changing in the U.S. educational system, and Anita Hoge is going to tell us all about that. And she has written an open letter to Senator Bob Casey, okay? And there's a new amendment to the No Child Left Behind Act that you need to know about. So don't move. Don't touch that dial, because we're going to reveal it to you today. Now, she has lectured all over the United States in the 90s, okay? She was the tip of the spear on an investigation against the Pennsylvania Department of Education. The federal government was also investigating the Pennsylvania Department of Education. She was a part of that program. Well, what's happening now in Pennsylvania is about to roll out for the entire country. If you thought Common Core was scary, now you've probably seen these pictures show up in your email or perhaps your Facebook news feed or something like that, where you have these math problems that make no sense at all. 2 plus 2 does not equal 4 anymore, according to Common Core. All right? Well, now, something even worse is about to happen. And it's Common Core on steroids, if you ask me. But it's a different aspect. Anita, you there?
I'm here. How are you?
Welcome to the Power Hour.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me.
Now, let's get into this. You have written an open letter to Senator Bob Casey. Now, this letter, it presents a federal template. His bill presents a federal template for this No Child Left Behind Act. But before we get into that, tell us about the 1990s. Tell us what your fight was with the Pennsylvania Department of Education.
Okay, well, it's a long time ago, of course, but it's a journey that, you know, when you send your kids to school, you're so excited when they get on that bus to go to school the first time, and you're all excited about that. And what happened was son had come home from school saying that he had just taken a test that he couldn't answer the questions. And it was just a really eye-opening experience, because he said, when I asked him what was like a sample question on the test, he said, one of the questions was, if you saw an old lady on the street, what would you do? A, throw rocks at her, B, push her down, whatever. So I was actually writing a grant for the Artisan Education Program in my district at the time, and was working very closely with the superintendent. So I went to her and I asked to see the test, and she picked up a book and threw it across the room, and she said, "You and I are not going to be friends anymore." And I said, well, I really don't care, because I want to see the test. So this is where my journey began. I began to write letters. I went in front of the school board. I went to the state level. I demanded to see the test. I continued to be denied access. And in the meantime, with all this letter writing, and that was like over 6 months that I've never had been able to see the test, I decided to file on the federal level against the Pennsylvania Department of Ed, because it was their state assessment, which every state in the entire whole country has a state assessment, or they're involved with these national consortiums for Common Core. But to make a long story short, I did win my federal complaint. They did have, and I freedom of information, my own complaint. So I got all of the documents that Pennsylvania had to supply to the feds in order to review and document what they were doing. And it turned out that the Pennsylvania EQA, that's what it was called, the Educational Quality Assessment, was a model for the nation. There were 350 questions, psychological questions on the test, 30 questions in math and 30 questions in reading analogies. So the entire test was a model for the national test, which was called the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. So Pennsylvania is the prototype for testing attitudes, values, beliefs, and dispositions of children. Now, I want your listeners to think about this a minute. So when you ask a child their value or their belief, say an honesty question or an interpersonal skills, that's questions about themselves and their personalities, how do you think the government scores that? How do you score honesty? Who decides what honesty is? How much is too much and how much is not enough in order to graduate? How do you put a proficiency level? Because now everything is not grades. You have to be proficient. What's a proficiency level for interpersonal skills? What if you, as a parent, disagree with the government? So this is the agenda. This agenda is a mental health agenda. And this is what parents need to understand. When your state comes in and says, oh, we want to test higher order thinking skills. We want to test thinking. And, you know, it's so important for your child to learn how to think. Okay, what are you actually testing? And these tests are testing what they call beyond text. What that means is you can't go back into the story and get the answer. Why? Because they're going to ask your child their opinion or their value judgment. Let me just give you a little example of one. And it's usually tucked within the language arts of the reading, okay, because sometimes it's not as blatant as it was when they tested my children back in the 90s. So let's say they give a little story. This is what they usually do. They give a story and they'll say, oh, gee, there's this story about the ant and the dove. And the ant is this industrious worker working all the time and just really concentrates on doing their work. And there is a dove, a free-flying spirit, doesn't care about anything and is just happy to be flying. So one of the questions might be, number one, who were the two characters in the story? That's a comprehension question. Okay, you can go back into the story and you know that was the the ant and the dove. So the next question might be, who would you rather be, the ant or the dove? So this is the technique, very scientific. Usually all of these tests are hand-scored because they're asking opinions and values of your children. So this is where I began. I began with this mental health agenda, the testing of attitudes and values. Now, when I filed my federal complaint, the government had to withdraw all of these, what they call affective domain, the testing of attitudes, from the test. So the parents in Pennsylvania, and we had quite a bit of them that were following along with what I had done at the time. So we forced the government at that time to withdraw all of the attitudes and values, the mental health agenda from the testing that you could identify. And they became more scientific and more precise of how they were going to identify all the attitudes and values of children. So what we're talking about is a psychometric dossier on your children when they not only test the academics, but they're testing the psychological part of your child, the attitudes and values.
Wow.
Now, when you started out by talking about Common Core, there is a big agenda to move forward to test attitudes again. Okay, and
well, before we get into the Common Core, first of all, I'm going to say I'm the dove. Okay, I'm the one that was flying free. But now, but see, they want to put a cage around us all, and whether that cage, we can see it or we can't. This is what's happening in the school system today. You ring a bell and you can walk out the door. You raise your hand. Anyway, I'm getting into the school system itself. I was never a fan, but right now, Senator Bob Casey, what is he up to?
Okay. Well, Bob Casey is a part of the agenda because it actually started when his father was governor of Pennsylvania at the same time when we were filing this federal complaint. Okay, so he created something called the Children's Cabinet. So the now Senator Bob Casey Jr. wants to attach an amendment to No Child Left Behind, the reauthorization of ESEA. Now, this is extremely important right now because in the next week, the Senate and the House of Representatives is bringing forward a reauthorization of No Child Left Behind. It's called the reauthorization of ESEA, ESEA, and that stands for the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So what?
All right, we're coming up on a break, and we're going to get into that in just a few minutes. Stick around. You're listening to the Power Hour. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the Power Hour. I am your guest co-host, Gary Franchi, sitting with Joyce Riley. We are in the third most powerful hour on radio, and you're listening to our interview with Anita Hoge. Now, which one are you? Are you the ant or are you the dove? If you see that question, be careful how you answer it because you just don't know which database you're going to be entered into when you're at the State Re-Education Center, which is the public school system. Now, No Child Left Behind, getting ready for reauthorization. Senator Bob Casey now has an amendment. It's pretty frightening. Now, I've read this letter. Anita, tell me, and our listeners here, this goes beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Okay. What your listeners need to understand is that education is being used to set up data tracking and trafficking of on individuals. It's not just in, of course, children in school. It's on everyone. So education was used to create the data system for tracking. So understand that first. Now, the reauthorization of ESEA is K through 12. Okay, so we had also found that Pennsylvania was a model to create the data trafficking system, okay, to monitor individuals. So they created a unique national ID for every child in the United States. And the federal government issued grants to every state in order to set up this monitoring of individuals. Now let's go back to the ants and the doves. Put that in the back of your mind that there's a system that the government is putting in place to monitor individuals. Now, let's go back to the ant and dove. How do you score the ant and the dove? So if you answered that you were the ant, how would you be scored? Or if you answered you were the dove, how would you be scored? So what I found in the test when I filed my federal complaint, that the test was scored toward collectivism. In other words, if you scored that you were the dove, that is a behavioral weakness. They want everyone to be the docile worker, the ant, the worker bee, okay? This is what I found. So I have the scoring on the test. The whole entire test was to gain information on each individual in order to create what they called interventions. Okay, let's talk about Bob Casey.
So this comes back now to your